So lately, I've seen a lot of really amazing little towns and cities and hub worlds that everybody's been making. But I think it's not obvious necessarily how to keep players in your map. And I wanted to do a little something to show some ways that you might keep players sort of contained in your map and make it feel more like it's a real place and less like it's a strange floating island. I'm going to use the same template toys that everybody else has been using. We've got this house here, a tree, a bench, the door, some hats, swimming pool, some cars. So, you can get all of these by just going down to the templates bar and then just looking at the featured. That's where all that stuff came from. And then I've also pulled out a handful of other voxel objects. I went and I found a shop, which I have scaled up by 2.69, and a hedge, which I've scaled up by 2. I've got like a little display stand and a bench and a couple of pieces of road, and then some choices for background objects. I'm not sure which of these we're going to use yet, but I wanted to talk about some different ways that you could sort of contain your environment. Okay, so the first kind of fun thing that we're going to do here is we're just going to go to the bench and copy its voxel object. Yeah, I can do that right here with the copy button if I hover on it. And then go to the other object and hit paste. And so now if I hit play, oops, I can sit on the bench. So next, let's change our city ambience. We don't need it to sproing, and I don't need it to have a name above it. So I'm just gonna hide all that. We're gonna find some ambience. I like this one because it has birds and stuff, so we'll take that. When you set ambience, though, you normally have to turn it down a lot quieter or it'll be kind of annoying. So I'm going to turn the gain down to 0.02 and hit play. I think that's okay. And we'll just hide the ghetto blaster somewhere. Okay, so that's sort of the only tricky kind of things I'm going to do. I'll assemble the city really quick and then we'll start talking about the background. We built our city. Now, background is the problem, right? Like we're just looking off into the blue void. And there's many different ways to solve this. There's no one right way, but I'm just going to show you a quick way that I use a lot and you can experiment and see what you can come up with. Stop the game. Now, these two items, this one's adding a custom set of emotes to the level, and this one is adding that background sound effects that we have. Neither of these need to ever be seen by the player, so I'm just gonna hide them somewhere that I might remember. Maybe I'll put them back here behind the shop. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of build a fence. So I've chosen this object by Summer Sky. It's just a hedge. I've scaled it up by 2 because it's a little too detailed to be just at a scale of 1. You can make a bigger hedge, right? You could make a Vox object that had 8 hedges or 16 or 20, but there's actually another thing that you can do here instead to make this longer, and that's to duplicate the voxel component. So I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to hit paste as new up here. And then I'm going to go down to the offset and I'm going to just move it on X. So I'm going to do that one more time so that I've essentially got a much longer wall now. But of course, if we hit play, we would find that the player can run right through these extra parts because the voxel collision that it's set to will only work on the main voxel object. So this wouldn't work to block the player. So we need to do another thing to it, which is to adjust the collision. So if I go here to the collider and I set it to box, Now it's still, you see that blue outline? That's sort of indicating where the box collider is. So it's still actually too small. But in the case of a box, we can change the size of it. So we know it needs to be about 3 times as wide as it is right now. So let's go do that. So then we hit stop and play. And now if I run up to it, I won't be able to get through it. Okay, so let's stop the game again. I actually want the player to stay in this map no matter what. Like, even if they get up high and they jump like off a roof or something somehow, I don't want them to be able to jump out of my map easily. So I'm going to also make this box much taller. And you'll see it sticking down below the map by default right now. So we're gonna change the Y value until it's sitting on the ground. So if it's going to be 120 high, then setting it to 120 seems to work. Now, that is now a giant, giant invisible wall, and the player just can't get over it. If it has any rotation on it, they might actually be able to hop over it, just because of sort of how the player movements and the physics type things work in Big Bang. So we can also give it a tag called no ground. So we'll just type that. Now, even if this is rotated, the player shouldn't be able to get up it. Let's just go check. The player just can't get up this wall. Okay, so we're gonna stop the game again. We'll set the transform back to 0. All right, so now I have a hedge wall that can be used to just keep the player in the map. So we're going to copy this around and just use it to completely fence in our whole area. If you see me moving a whole bunch of objects at once, like copying it, that means I'm holding down control as I drag, and that makes a duplicate of the thing that I was dragging. So let's hit play. That has now made our little town be blocked in by a hedge. So the player is now sort of stuck in this box. And it would be nicer to vary it, you know, so it's not all just one hedge. Maybe there's some chunks of building blocking parts of it, like the backs of buildings from another street, maybe some fences. But just to show you what I mean really quickly, the hedge is just a nice, easy example. The second part of the problem, where we feel like we're just in a blue void, that's still an issue. Let's stop the game again and look out here. There's a lot of objects that can be helpful here. So this is actually a very small object by Summer Sky that has been scaled up here by 51. You can see I've scaled it by, rotated by 45 degrees. Because what she's done here is cleverly make the points of the mountain by using the voxels at an angle, which is really cool. So let's scale this thinner like this, and let's do the same thing we did with Hedge, where we're going to add some extra parts. This one's a little trickier because it's at an angle, so the offsets aren't quite as easy, but you can still do it. You just kind of got to fudge the numbers around. I now have this nice long strip of mountains. A fog can color stuff in the distance, and fog's a very useful way to show distance in a game, but you can also fake it in a video game. So that's what I'm going to do here now. I'm going to add a little bit of like an emissive color to sort of imply that this thing is in the distance. So I don't want it to be pure white because the blue from the sort of atmosphere would be coloring it a little bit. I think I like that. I'm going to just copy these colors to the other 2 mountains. I should have done it before I duplicated them. We don't want this to be too close to the hedge or it'll look kind of weird, but if we get a little bit of a distance, it'll be okay. Now if we go walk over to that side, I've got the snow is definitely too blue. I have to turn that down. Some of what's adding the blue there is the mood settings from the fog I mentioned before. That's here. You can change the color of it and how far out it goes using these buttons here. I normally have the fog shut off while I'm in the editor view just because it makes it easier to work, but in the debug menu, you can turn that on and off. Since I was faking the background, I didn't really want the fog to be changing this very much. In fact, I could just push it right out like that. It'd be fine. The near is how close to the player the fog starts. In some cases, you might want these numbers really close to you, like what I've done here. This would make it feel like it was cloudy or something, especially if I changed the fog. I could really change the mood. So near is how close to you the fog starts, and then far is when it's fully foggy. I'm just gonna set it back to what I had it as there. If you want it to feel more like a city, you could use one of these objects here. This one's a skybox one called Builder Dash Skybox. This object's called Distant City Skyline Recolor. So you use these the same kind of way you did the mountains. I'm going to use this one here just because it's just one piece, so I can do it really fast. But you do whatever looks good for your game. So all I'm going to do is change the size of this until it's bigger than my map by a generous border. I want it to sort of just be visible over the hedges and things. We'll scale it till we get the kind of impression that there's city out there. And in this case, we don't need collision on it. I'll just remove that. I don't want to see all the details in it. So I'm going to turn it pure black, and then I'm going to go to the emissive, and I'm going to pick a color that's just a little bit darker than my sky. Again, because the point of it is just to make it so you're not in an absolute void. I don't really need you to see the buildings. It's just so that you're existing within an environment. Okay, so let's push this one down out of the way. And of course you could layer these as well, right? You could put a city skyline, and then further out you could put mountains or something. This piece could be used the same way. This one's quite nice. I like that has all the like building details in it. Give it a color so that it's just visible in the distance. Like that looks great. That implies that there's a whole city out there. Okay, now a final one. If you're not in a city and you want a solution that's more like you're in a forest or something like that, would be to use this object here. I mean, you don't have to use this. You can go make your own. But this one here is the backdrop from the Halloween fun game. And I'm just going to give it a smidge of emissive so that it's not quite so dark, because since it was made for a Halloween game, it's a bit crazy. And then I'm going to go add a particle to it. Just go new, and there's really fun new particle settings now. If you haven't checked them out, I really recommend you just go through, because now you can just instantly get a bunch of these fun effects. So there's sparkles, there's debris, there's snow, this is a fountain, so explore that. It's totally fun. But we're going to use bush, and then we're going to change the colors of it so that it'll fade a bit better into the background. We change the color in the basics tab. Then if we go down to the emitter tab and we go to the emitter size, shut off uniform values, and then change the X value so that it's a little wider. Change the Y value so that it's a little taller. Then go down to the offset and change the X value to move them up in the air. So you can just sort of muck about with this till you're happy with it. If we go back to the basics, we're going to make the N size a little bit bigger to fill it out a bit. And obviously you change the colors and stuff till it's something you're happy with. That kind of backdrop piece, again, you can repeat it over and over, and it'll give the impression that you're in more of a country setting. Okay, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to finish filling out the background, and then I'll show you what my final game looked like. Then you can take a shot at using some of these techniques to fill out the backgrounds of your worlds. All right, so this is obviously kind of a cartoony little town that I made. You can definitely make something more realistic if you make custom background pieces. And you might want to take something to hide that sort of ground around it, right? Like I can see under the mountains there. I'd probably even use something like particles for that. So you could also use something like a stretched hedge piece. Let's try that. Basically just want something with a little bit of noise to hide the gap. So this hedge piece is kind of good because it's got some kind of random detail, right? Any of these objects too, you can just remove collision on them. If they're outside of they're just backdrop objects, then there's no reason to have collision on them. And that's it. We should now have a fully locked in little map that doesn't look totally crazy if you kind of look outside the borders of it, but it feels like you're in a place. You're not just sort of floating in space. Putting some particle clouds up in the sky would also be an excellent thing to do. That would also help fill it in and make it feel more cohesive. All right, can't wait to see what games you make.